everybody, welcome back. If you're new here, hi, I'm Mercury. Welcome to my channel. It's my daily vlog, so whatever I'm up to, it's what you're gonna see here. And today, what I thought I would do is a little year in review in my books. So I had thought I only read a handful of books this past year in 2022. I'm mistaken. I was going over my book list on Goodreads of everything that I read, and I actually read a lot more than I thought I did. So I was pleasantly surprised, but that also made me reflect on like which of these books stuck with me, which of this is just like a time blur where I thought I knew I read it, but it was like years ago, but it was actually this past year. So I just sort of wanted to talk about the books that really resonated with me over the past year, and then the ones that just weren't quite so memorable. I don't think any of the books that I read this past year were bad books. They were all good books, but there are just some that I clicked with and some that I didn't click with. You know, and that's totally okay. So that being said, let's rewind and let's go through the books. And if there are any of these books that I did a more in-depth book review on, I will throw the link up. But it's also interesting to talk about, like, at the end of the year, what did you read and what are you holding on to from that book? And did it really stick with you or not? So I thought that would be interesting. So I have my list from Goodreads here so I can refer back to it. And it looks like I started out the year reading West with Giraffes. Now that is a book by Lynda Rutledge. I loved this book. I do recall that I did a book review on this one, and I did put a trigger warning on it because it was set, you know, in, I think it was either the 1920s or 1940s, and the sensibilities and language that we use then are very discriminatory. So, you know, it's appropriate for the sign of the times and to give the context of how people were treated, but it can also be very triggering to read books that are written from that time period. So I do say that. But in terms of the story itself, this was the journey of giraffes that were going on a road trip. And I'm not being metaphoric with these giraffes. These were like two literal giraffes that had come across the ocean, landed on the East Coast in the New York area. And, you know, and I mean, like the boat docked and they got off the boat. And these giraffes were put into like a vehicle and they took a road trip across America because they were destined to go to the San Diego Zoo. And that book is that road trip with two giraffes across America. It was really, really interesting. It was a really good read. It was really engaging. And even now, like, that was the first book I read in 2022. According to my Goodreads, I finished it in March. And I am still excited about it almost a year later. That was a really enjoyable tale. Yeah, definitely. Then the next book that I read was The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. Also, very memorable book. I forgot that I read this book in 2022. I thought I read this like years ago because there was something about this book that just resonated in me so much that I felt like I incorporated it into, you know, my literary history. But it was only in this past year that I read it. And The Left Hand of Darkness, it was this adventure. It dealt with a lot of stuff. It dealt with isolation. It dealt with being an outcast. It dealt with LGBTQ issues. It dealt with gender fluidity. And this was a book that was written, I believe, in the 1970s, I want to say. I'm going to look that up. Wait a minute. And this was a book that was written in 1969. So we were not having conversations about these topics the way that we were today back then. You know, so much like a lot of other science fiction, you know, authors and filmmakers and TV creators were able to quote unquote get away with things because they use science fiction to tell the story. Oh, it's not real, it's science fiction. But they used it as either a metaphor or a parallel to things that were actively currently going on in society. And Ursula Le Guin brilliantly did that in The Left Hand of Darkness, and it is still a valid and true book today, and I absolutely loved that book. It has rereadability. I would certainly go back to that again in the future. It was a worthwhile read. So the next book I read was Elevation by Stephen King. This one was interesting. I always try to read one Stephen King book every year. I also try to read one Anne Rice book every year. So this was my Stephen King book, and it was an interesting tale. So it was about a man who, on the outside, his physical appearance did not change, but he was losing weight, and he was losing weight, and he was losing more weight. And like, he couldn't figure out what was going on, didn't understand why, doctors didn't know what was happening. And he got lighter and lighter and lighter to the point of like non-existence, and it's called elevation. Like, he floats, he's so light. So it's interesting. It's like combination of sort of like, what's happening, what's going on here, why is this happening, and the human aspect of it, like, what is this happening doing to him, and his relations with his family and friends, and, you know, his ability to work, and what does this mean, and do people believe him, and what is the impact that's having. Like, so it was this good balance of those two types of aspects of how a major life event would impact somebody. Enjoyable read. And I finished that one in June, and I still have pretty good recall of that book. So, you know, if I'm using my recall as like a benchmark, you know, it was pretty good. I also read Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. This was hard to read. This was painful to read, but it was necessary to read. There's a lot of trauma and a lot of hardship that she's describing. Things that a person should never have to go through in their life. Things that should never happen to a human. So it's definitely hard to read and hard to hear these things, and hard to, you know, for me, when I'm reading, I'm envisioning and I'm experiencing, and to put myself in that zone and be there for this journey was painful. It was painful. So I'm glad I read it. It gave me, I don't want to say more empathy, because I think the empathy was there, but it gave me a better understanding. It gave me another lens. And I think it's sort of that, you know, difference between knowing something and getting a first-hand account of something and experiencing something. They're all different levels of consciousness, and I am never gonna, you know, hopefully have the experiencing something lens, you know, but the first-hand account lens, it's powerful. It's powerful. So, yeah, that was Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. I think it's an important book for people to read. And I also think it's an important piece of American history that we can't forget about. We need to learn from. We need to not repeat. We need to move forward. And, you know, if we don't learn our history and we don't learn the mistakes that we made, we'll be doomed to repeat them. And we can't do that. Then another book that I read was The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter. I'm kind of mixed on this one. It was, how do I describe this? So the story of this book was the descendants of the great monster tales that we know. So Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, Dracula, were some of the other characters in there. Van Helsing, yeah, so descendants from these great monster, villain archetypes from, our classic stories of literature and film. Through various reasons, some through happenstance, some through intent, end up gathering upon themselves, and and it's an adventure of self-discovery that they go through. And yeah, this was one of those books, like, I remember being so excited to read it. I thought the storyline was awesome and creative, and I was so excited. And I think I had an expectation in my mind going into it of what I wanted it to be, and that's not what it was. And because of that, it was not my favorite book. It was an enjoyable book, but I think my expectation didn't match with reality, which caused the split in how I feel about this book. Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad book. It's definitely not. It's just, I think I wanted something different. And that's okay. That was just my opinion on how I felt. Then there was Cloud Atlas. For the life of me, I could not connect to this book. And as I progressed through this book, I think I figured out why I was struggling so badly to connect to this book. The way that it's organized, the first half to 2/3 of the book are separate stories that are not interconnected, and they don't wind together until you get to the last, half to third of the book. And because, like, for me, books can be escapism. Books whisk me away to another land, and I'm immersed in that other land. Because that's the way I experience literature, every time there was a change, I was not expecting to leave the world that I was in. I was not expecting to be in a new world in every chapter and have to reacclimate every chapter. And because of that, I just couldn't connect. So, like, the first half of the book, it feels like you're reading a different book every chapter. They are very different worlds. There's different topics going on. The characters are not the same. And because it was such a dramatic divide between chapters, I couldn't get there. I finished it. I got far enough into it that I felt invested in it and invested in finishing it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And that is, it's unfortunate. But it's just the way my brain is wired. My brain did not allow me to connect to it. Another book that I read this year was The Vampire Armand. So much like Stephen King, I also read one Anne Rice book every year, and this year it was The Vampire Armand. Anne Rice is always good. So much like other Anne Rice books, it's a little bit slow in the beginning, but once she gets going, she is off, and it is an incredible journey. So The Vampire Armand is pretty much what it sounds like. So all the vampire books, the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, they're all sort of like biographies of the vampires that are being described, and this one is Armand's tale. Armand is introduced in the beginning. He is a character introduced in Interview with a Vampire. He is like the head vampire in Paris when Lestat and Louis are there. The Vampire Armand goes into the before that time and the after that time, if I recall correctly. It also talks about his relationship with Lestat and why he has such strong feelings about Lestat. But yeah, you know, I always enjoy a good Anne Rice book. She's a very impactful author in my life. I had the privilege of getting to meet her at a book signing back when Servant of the Bones came out. She did a book signing at the Book Review, was the bookshop I saw her at. And it was just like one of those formative memories that I have, and it was a great experience. So yeah, that was my Anne Rice book for the year. Okay, I also read The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. And this, I really enjoyed reading this book. It's about a woman who moves into a house and she's looking for her lost sister. And it's kind of in part like a whodunit, like what happened kind of mystery, but it's got a lot of twists and turns in there. But yeah, this is one of those books that, like, I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to spoil anything if you want to read it. And if I talk too much about it, I don't want to give away one of those kind of moments. So I'm just going to kind of leave it in that and just say I really enjoyed reading this one. Yeah. Then, what else did I read? Oh, I read The Rum Diary, Hunter S. Thompson. Hunter S. Thompson's another one of those authors that I really enjoy reading. Part of it is just kind of unimaginable what his life was like. Hunter S. Thompson, quite a character, and you know, it's like I will never lead the life of Hunter S. Thompson. That is not in my cards. But to be able to vicariously experience what he has done in his life, man, oh man. So The Rum Diary is, he was a reporter and he went down to a Caribbean island. I can't recall exactly which one off the top of my head. And, you know, just his experience while he was down there and what that was like. Just for context, Hunter S. Thompson, if you're not familiar, also wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail, Hell's Angels, Kingdom of Fear. Yeah, Hunter S. Thompson is... There has been and will never be anyone like him. So if you... Yeah, always an interesting read. And then I also read Hush Hush by Becca Fitzpatrick. And this is... I mean, technically it's a young adult book, but I was still able to connect to it. It was still a good read. It's about a high school girl who, you know, develops a friendship with, you know, a high school boy, and, you know, he is, you know, the kind of kid that gets into a lot of trouble. And there's some interesting and like sci-fi aspects to this book, but it's also just like, I don't know, I knew people who kind of were similar to character archetypes in this book, so it was interesting to see it on the page like this. But yeah, I really enjoy this. This is another one where it's like, not that it's a whodunit, but as information is given to you through the course of reading this book, you're like, oh, okay. And I don't want to take that moment away from anybody. So yeah, it's high school relationships, but written in a way that even as an adult, I was able to connect to it. I was definitely able to connect to it. So, you know, just think about your high school days and you'll get it. Then I also read a nonfiction book. I read Your Money or Your Life, which is basically a way of like sort of rethinking about relationships with money and what your time is worth. And, you know, it's like, is your time, like, how do you value yourself and how do you value your time? Because time is really all we have. Life is short and and what are we attributing the value of money to, and where's the balance in that? What is healthy for you as an individual? Conceptually, I liked it. I didn't get a lot out of it because a lot of it was, I already think that way. So it wasn't like revolutionary information for me. But, you know, not everybody is wired like that. And some people have, you know, struggles with money or struggles with their relationship with money and what money means to them and things like that. And it's a good way to reframe, to have healthy relationships with money versus time and personal boundaries and sort of just like what's important to you. And that was written by Joseph Dominguez and Vicki Robin. So that is my year in book review. I honestly, when I was talking about the books I read at the end of the year, like a few weeks ago, I thought I only read like 5 books. I did not realize that so many of the books that I read this year were this year. Time got a little conflated. It's not that I didn't remember reading these books, but I didn't remember that they were in 2022. So that's like, I love Goodreads because it helps me keep track of this. So that way I can look back and be like, oh yeah, I did read that. Or, oh, I remember that was a good one. Or like, what was that? What? Oh. And it helps me, you know, keep all my internal literary filing cabinet in order by keeping it external on Goodreads. So that's helpful to me. I also enjoy Goodreads because it helps me find books to read. Between being able to see what my friends are reading and also like there's like reading clubs on it, and you know they do reading challenges, so it's like it's good for different book recommendations and seeing what other people are reading and enjoying. Also, I'm a big fan of the library. I get a lot of my books are ebooks direct to my Kindle right from my library, which I think is an amazing part about living in the future. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. So with that, I am done for now, and that was my year in book review. And with that, I am done, and I'll see everybody real soon. And until then, stay inspired by everyone. Take care.